Happy Friday. Welcome back to Mets Daily. I'm Jake Brown. Hit that thumbs up button. Comment below. We'll read your comments at the end of today's show. Make sure you subscribe as well. And follow your boy at Jake Brown Live. Go subscribe to my YouTube right now. Freddy Peralta's in New York, Met. What a beautiful day. What a beautiful time. And, we start to think about extension with 1 year, $8 million left on his contract. You're starting to think, is he going to be a 1 year rental, or can the Mets get an extension done with Freddy Peralta? Obviously, David Stearns has worked with Freddy Peralta in the past. Peralta's agency, Aces, has been open to extensions in the past, which includes David Wright's 8-year extension with the Mets following the 2012 season. Now, listen, I don't think there's any rush right now for this extension. I think Met fans are like, before opening day, get this done. We haven't seen the guy pitch yet in a Mets uniform. We know his track record. We know he's a frontline starter. I get the issues that, sometimes he pinpoints around the strike zone. It doesn't always get through 7 innings, sometimes not 6. Not really a 200-plus inning pitcher, but more of a 180. Listen, the Mets will take that at this point with what we saw last year with guys not being able to get through the fourth. Now, I think that's going to change, and I want to talk about the rotation in a minute on today's show, but the reality is there's no deadline to get this Peralta extension done. I think the Mets are going to talk, and what that number is going to look like, it's probably going to be somewhere in that $25 to $30 million a year range. That's just the going rate for starters. When you look at other numbers, and Will Salmon did a good job of this with The Athletic and just basing projections and comparing it to Tyler Glasnow, who got 4 years, 111.6 in new money. When you talk about inflation and now today's modern day and Dylan Cease getting 7 for 210, which had a lot of deferrals, it's going to be somewhere around there. It's going to be in that, 5 for 140 range, 4 years, 120, something in that range. And, I think the Mets are going to want to bring him back for the long term. I think obviously David Stearns know him. David Stearns likes him. David Stearns knows the person. And I think that's what you got to consider here. David Stearns knows a lot about Freddy Peralta. He would not have made this trade if he did not love what he's going to bring to the team on the mound and in the clubhouse. And I think that's something you have to factor in the back of your mind when you think about Freddy Peralta in a Mets uniform and Freddy Peralta in the long term. So, do you have to get it done? I don't think it's a need. Will they get it done? I think they will. And I wouldn't worry too much about this. I wouldn't say, if you trade 2 top 10 Mets prospects for a rental, you're an idiot. That's just not the logic you should have right now. The logic is let's see him pitch, and if they get a deal done before opening day, great. I do think there is an element to a chip on your shoulder and entering a walk here that kind of motivates you a little bit more on the mound that makes me say, you know what? Why not let him pitch a couple months and maybe all-star break, trade deadline time, you see where he's at, and if he's pitching great, you give him that back. I don't think the Mets are restricted to do that. So I do think what the number's going to look like, guys, it's going to be in the 120 range plus. Some kind of area of that realm. And I think Peralta, if he likes it here, if he likes these teammates, if he likes New York, he's going to take that, and Freddy Peralta is going to be a frontline starter for the Mets for a while. When you think about frontline starter and this rotation, is this rotation good enough? Are they deep enough? And I think the reality is they're not getting Framber. They're not getting another frontline starter. And I do think it is good enough. I don't think the Mets are going to have the same 3-4 inning slop fest. That doesn't happen. That was like an anomaly. By the way, for the first half of the season, while the Mets were the best team in the sport, they had the best pitching in the sport. So what happened in the second half was bizarre. That's not something that is regular, and I don't think it's going to be regular. And when we look at this depth chart, and I want to look at that with you right now on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're an Apple or Spotify person, come on over to YouTube and look on the screen as we dive into this rotation. I believe Spotify actually has video now, so you could see it on there as well. But Freddy Peralta, probably your opening day starter when the Mets, Peralta versus Skeens, an old NL Central matchup. Now with Peralta in the NL East on an opening day at Citi Field. Can't wait to be there with my dad, 23 straight years in a row. Noah McLean is probably your number 2. You're probably going to want to break it up with a lefty, with Sean Manaea being your 3. A healthy Sean Manaea will be huge for this team. Kodai Senga, Clay Holmes, David Peterson, your 4 through 6 in any kind of order. I don't think there's a concrete order. If Kodai Senga stays in a Mets uniform, you stick with that 6-man rotation. And I think that is a strong six-man. I mean, David Peterson was an all-star. Kodai Senga a couple of years ago was an ace-like pitcher. And Clay Holmes, I thought, did a good job in his first year. Like, I'm perfectly fine if you break it up like this. Why I did it like this, you have Minaya as your 3, Peterson 6. That has lefties every couple of days. You could also have Senga be your 6, whatever it is. You got 2 out of 6. You have 2 lefties, 4 righties. And then you look at the depth. The Mets' depth is far better than it was last year when you look at this rotation. Tobias Myers is going to be your long man, but if he needs to step in and start, he's done it before. He did it against the Mets in the playoffs and completely shut them down. He's probably your 7. Christian Scott is probably your 8. Maybe he's your 7. Maybe he enters the rotation if you do move a Sanger or Peterson in a trade. You have Christian Scott. Now, I think Scott's going to need some starts in AAA, but you have Scott there. You have Jonah Tong, who needs more development in AAA, but if you do need him at some point, we've seen him have some success in the big leagues, where at some point Jonah Tong's going to be there. And then what I love is, that Syracuse train, the up and down guys, those are your number 10 guys. That's your 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Like, you really have to have, knock on wood, several injuries to even get to those guys. That's Carl Edwards Jr., who's a reliever who the Mets are going to try to stretch to a starter, but is probably going to end up being a reliever. You have Justin Hageman, who we saw did actually a really good job stepping in at times. You have Brandon Waddell, same thing, did a good job of coming up here when the Mets needed him. You have Jack Wenninger, who is the next big thing after Tong and Scott in the farm system, who's likely going to start the season in AAA. And you have Jonathan Pitaro, who you saw a cup of coffee of for a couple innings, who started in AAA last year, and then the Mets randomly brought him up from AA to the big leagues, and he clearly wasn't ready. But he is basically your number 14. So when you say, oh, the Mets rotation's still not good, look at this graphic here, and it'll show you that the Mets rotation has some promise. And when you think about the future, and if you extend Peralta, you start to think, all right, let's just say Peralta signs an extension at some point. You have Peralta for the long term. You have McLean for the long term. You have Tobias Myers for the long term. You have Christian Scott for the long term. You have Jonah Tong for the long term. You have Jack Wenninger if you don't trade him for the long term. You have Sean Manaea for one more year after this year. You have Kodai Senga for one more year after this year, assuming you keep him. You have Clay Holmes for one more year after this year. You have David Peterson, who's going to be a free agent. My guess is the Mets don't bring David Peterson to a long-term deal next year, but we'll see. Maybe they do. But you have promise. I mean, Peralta 1, a McLean a 2, and just thinking long-term. Let's forget about Manaea. Let's forget about Senga and Holmes and Peterson for now. Peralta, McLean, Myers, Scott, Tong, and then those other guys and whoever else you may add. You already have 5 long-term starters if you extend a Peralta, and we're not even talking about adding other guys free agency via trade. This rotation's going to have promise, guys, and I think you're going to see a much different team on the mound, with a different philosophy when it comes to the pitching staff. So I love it. I think it's going to be good. And listen, if it doesn't work, the Mets at the deadline could say, you know what? We need to go get another arm. They can always go get another arm at the deadline. Your team opening day is not your team on August 1st. It's always a different team. Mets, another move they made yesterday to make it a different team was acquiring Vidal Bruhan from the Twins for cash considerations. And I think this was kind of a depth add here. Vidal Bruhan has played all positions on the diamond. He does have a lot of speed. I think the Mets like his speed element. Bruhan was with multiple teams, with the Cubs, a game with the Orioles, and 23 games with the Braves in 2025. Was with the Rays and Marlins prior to that. I think the Mets just like his versatility here and why they added him. This is a guy who has played, more than one game, several games at second base, in right field, in center field, in left field, in third base, and shortstop. So he is the Spanish Joe McEwing for the New York Mets. And he's played, just like Jorge Polanco, one game, a third of an inning at first base. So he's played first, second, third, short, left, center, right. Hell, the guy's even pitched for 3 2/3 innings. How about that? Vidal Bruhan has even pitched. This is a guy, the only position Bruhan has not played is catcher. And listen, I'm not raving about this move. The guy stinks. He's not any good. But when you talk about just positional flexibility, depth, if 10 guys get hurt, you have Vidal Bruhan to basically do anything but be a catcher. Hell, he could probably even catch. So, now listen, in his 3 2/3 innings, he was not good. He gave up 11 runs, but he did it. So, I think he accomplished doing it. The Mets should put him in for an inning to catch in a blowout game, just for fun, to say that he's played all positions on the diamond. All right, folks, it's a Friday. Let's get your comments. I know I have been away from the comments the last few days. Just been too much going on, but we'll read through some of them now. Keep hitting that subscribe. Keep commenting. And go subscribe to my YouTube and follow me on X, TikTok, Instagram, at Jake Brown Live right now. We appreciate it. At Mets Daily Show on Twitter as well. From Le Poca, totally agree. The Mets needed to shake things up, and Stearns is doing a very good job at it. Yes, sir. VC Money, my thoughts are good to great deal. If they extend Peralta, it's definitely in the great camp. Yeah, I mean, again, the Mets have the money to do it. If they don't do it today and they do it midseason, or hell, they wait till the offseason, I think you kind of want to do it now because you don't want competition, and maybe you want to get it done now versus the new CBA and potentially a lockout next year. That maybe it helps if you get it done now to avoid any complication down the road. But I don't think it's like urgent to get it done. But I think they do. And I think the Peralta, Brewers, Stearns dynamic helps the Mets get this extension done. Nick Pauly says, I'm disappointed Stearns DFA'd Montas early in the offseason, as it would have been amusing to have our 3 2024 wildcard opponents and Devin Williams on the roster. I can only hope we keep all the abundance of starting pitching, even if Manaea or Myers takes turns in relief. We have to come into this season expecting multiple injuries, and 7 big league starters seems like a requirement in the pitch clock era. Good point, Nick. Yeah, I mean, the pitch clock era has forced a lot of injuries, and that's why I showed you that depth chart that you're going to see those guys. Like, you're going to see Tobias potentially start. You're going to see Jonah Tong at some point. You're going to see Christian Scott at some point. And the Mets have, if Christian Scott, who was the number one prospect that I mentioned, works out and he's your number 7 or 8, you're in really good hands. If Jonah Tong works out as promising as he looked in Double-A, as the pitcher of the year in Double-A in 2025, you're in good hands with him as your number 8. So I think you do see those guys sometime this summer or into the fall at Citi Field. And if Manaea's got to go to the bullpen if he doesn't work as a starter, I think that was a 1-year bomb because he was hurt and he came back with the bone chips in his elbow. I don't think Manaea was ever close to 100%. You could tell on the mound he was laboring all year. It just was a weird year for Sean Manaea. And it's a big year. Listen, the Mets essentially deferred one of his years. So let's use that year as deferral and hope he gets back to the 2024 Sean Manaea that they paid $25 million a year. From Jim Mitchell, he said, I remember when acquiring Steve Henderson, Patrick Zachary, Doug Flynn, and Dan Norman would change the trajectory of the franchise. Wait a minute. It did. From John Jimenez, he said, I said it after losing Alonso. Yeah, it sucked for a lot of us growing with that core, but there was definitely a plan. We had to be patient. There it is. Yeah, I mean, listen, the plan was to make the team better and to change the course of the Mets' future. The Mets did that. You don't go into the offseason with, we're going to sign this guy, trade. You have to play it out. You have to see where the numbers go, where players go. It's not something that's concrete, set in stone. And I think that's where fans were wrong when the Mets moved on from the core, was in December that David Stearns was going to know exactly which players he was going to get. Peralta was always on his radar. David Stearns said back in November, December that he was talking with the Brewers about a potential deal for him. So, Bo Bichette, he was talking early on. So once those guys became available and still available in January, that's when he pounced. It's not about making the move in November, December, just because fans are impatient. It's about making the move when it's available to happen. And Bichette, Peralta were available in January, and 2 guys early on in the offseason that Stearns had his eye on. You might not have heard about it, but it was in his rear view mirror. And objects in the mirror appear closer than they are. Well, they appeared close, and now they're New York Mets. From Jeffrey Suarez, I agree that the 2026 Mets are better than the 2025 Mets. David Stearns knows a lot how to use the aggregation of marginal gains to his advantage. These new arrivals are energetically charged and will ignite the others so that much that we see the great team spirit. The Mets weren't so good with men scoring position last year. It's a different game this year. Yeah, this was about getting better situationally. And I think a lot of people are being a little too lazy when it comes to, we didn't replace Alonso's home run production. That home run production had them 83 wins and missing the playoffs. What the Mets were doing was spreading the wealth across the diamond when it comes to more clutch hitters. You don't need, and I'm not going to say it again because I do. Every show I seem to mention what the Blue Jays did in 2025 with the lack of home run production, but deeper lineup production. And when I mention that, and when I mention Yandy Diaz, which I had, put a penny in the jar. Jake mentioned Yandy Diaz. But the reality is it was about runners in scoring position, getting better in certain situations, and striking out less. And what the Mets have done this offseason is that. They've got less strikeout players, better situational hitters, and I'm excited to see this lineup. MD says this makeover reminds me a lot what Glenn Sather did for the Rangers leading up and including 1994. He brought in hired guns who had won before and gave them one do-or-die mission as a group. And it wasn't just Messier. It was Tikkanen, Lowe, Maktovich, Anderson, Bukaboom, etc. Added a homegrown anchors like Leach, Graves, Kolev, and Zubov. Lots of interesting parallels. Should be interesting to see how this group gels. I suspect they're going to get much more smash mouth than recent teams, and I can't wait to see it. That's a great point. Yeah, the Rangers went all in that 94 season, and they won a cup. And listen, then they fired the coach, Mike Keenan. I've had a drink with Mike Keenan. I've interviewed Mike Keenan, and they got rid of. He was a hard-nosed guy, but they got rid of him. But he got that bunch to do what they needed to do. Carlos Mendoza is not a guy we've talked about a lot, but his role is going to be important. If this Mets team misses the playoffs, Carlos Mendoza will be fired, and this is a big year for Carlos Mendoza. He has an entirely new staff, and he's kind of a lame dunk manager where if he fails, he will be canned. This is a big year for him. He's got to step up. He pushed a lot of the right buttons in 2024. He didn't push them in 2025. Big year for Carlos Mendoza as well. John Fallon says, what do you think it would take to get someone like Mason Miller? I think it's going to take way too much, John. I don't think that's on the Mets' radar. I think what's on the Mets' radar is maybe another reliever, but not someone of the ilk of Mason Miller. They're not going to give up the farm for a reliever right now. I know there's some question marks in the bullpen, but why I showed you that starting rotation too is like a guy like Tobias Meyer stepping into that bullpen. They just signed a veteran, Luis Garcia, who had a nice season out of the bullpen, who's been in the big leagues for over a dozen years. So they have a nice mix of veterans and other guys. One guy they got rid of, they DFA Dickie Lovelady. They DFA Cooper Criswell, who was an interesting piece, who's had a bunch of major league time the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe the Mets end up getting him back. DFA doesn't mean they're not coming back. Another team can claim them, but if they're not, the Mets can get them back. So maybe Criswell becomes that guy. But remember when everyone got mad? Oh, Dickie Lovelady again. What are you doing? Well, these are the kind of guys that get DFA'd at some point. You knew Dickie Lovelady wasn't going to be an integral part of the bullpen, but some people chose to overreact because the Mets signed him in November. Well, now he's DFA'd, so you don't have to worry about Dickie Lovelady. You do have to worry about Mets Daily coming back on Monday because we will be back in the snowstorm because we are home. We are remote. We will perform. You might be off of school if you're watching this from school, if you're a teacher or a student, but we will be here on Monday. Stay safe, everybody. Blizzard Sunday, Monday. Knicks, Sixers, and Philly tomorrow. I'll be there. Let's go Knicks. Let's go Mets. Subscribe, smash that thumbs up, keep on commenting, and share the Mets Daily channel. We'll talk to you on Monday. Thank you so much for watching the show, as always. Have a great and safe weekend, and stay out of the snow, stay inside, and be safe out there. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for watching Mets Daily.